The first thing anyone noticed that morning wasn't the limousine. It was the silence. It was the kind of silence that hangs heavy, like the world itself is holding its breath. The kind that makes you pause mid-step, mid-thought, mid-life. And in that quiet, on a narrow street lined with tired houses and chip paint, a sleek black limousine rolled to a stop in front of a modest, weather-beaten home that had known more struggle than comfort. Inside that house lived a man who had once said something simple, almost forgettable, words spoken in kindness, not expectation. Pay me when you're the boss. He never thought those words would echo back to him 5 years later. Before we dive deeper into this story, take a second. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that even the smallest act can change a life, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Heartfelt Stories. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts. 5 years earlier, Armin Qureshi had been the kind of man the world barely noticed. A single father, worn down by long days and longer nights, raising his young daughter Zoya in a small rented house that creaked with every shift of the wind. Life hadn't just been hard. It had been relentless. His wife had passed away suddenly, leaving behind a silence in a house that no amount of effort could fill. Grief had no timetable, but bills certainly did. Armin worked at a small roadside auto repair shop, the kind that didn't have a signboard polished enough to attract customers, but survived on word of mouth and trust. His hands were always stained with grease, his clothes worn thin at the edges, but his eyes carried something rare, a quiet resilience, a refusal to let life turn him bitter. Zoya was his world. Every morning began with her sleepy voice asking if he would come back early, and every night ended with him promising he would try. He didn't always succeed, but he never stopped trying. One afternoon, under the harsh glare of the sun, when the heat felt like it could melt even hope itself, a young boy walked into the shop. His clothes were too big for him, his shoes worn out, and his face carried a mix of determination and desperation. His name was Rehan Malik, though at the time, he was just another struggling kid trying to survive a world that didn't care. Rehan had pushed a broken bicycle all the way to the shop. The chain had snapped, the tires were barely holding air, and the handle was slightly bent. But to him, that bicycle wasn't just metal and rubber. It was his livelihood. He used it to deliver newspapers early in the morning and groceries in the evening. Without it, he didn't eat. He stood there hesitant, as if stepping inside required more courage than he had left. Armin looked up from under the hood of a car, wiping sweat from his forehead, and saw him. There was something in that moment, a silent recognition of struggle, like one storm recognizing another. The boy explained, voice trembling slightly, that he needed the bicycle fixed, but didn't have money right now. He promised he would pay later, somehow, someday. Armin didn't ask questions about where his parents were, or why he was alone. He didn't lecture him about responsibility or doubt his sincerity. Instead, he crouched down, examined the bicycle, and then said those words so casually that even he didn't realize their weight. Pay me when you're the boss. Rehan looked confused at first, as if the sentence didn't belong in the reality he knew. But then something shifted in his expression, something fragile yet powerful. Hope. Armin spent the next hour fixing the bicycle, replacing what he could with spare parts, adjusting what he couldn't replace, and making sure it was sturdy enough to carry the boy through many more days. When Rehan left, he didn't just take a repaired bicycle with him. He carried something far more valuable, belief. Years passed, as they always do, quietly and without asking permission. Life didn't suddenly become easier for Armin. In fact, it became harder before it got better. The shop he worked at shut down unexpectedly when the owner fell ill and couldn't continue. Jobs became scarce, and savings disappeared faster than they had ever accumulated. Armin took whatever work he could find. Construction sites, delivery work, late-night shifts unloading trucks. His hands grew rougher, his back bent a little more each year, but his spirit, though tested, never completely broke. Zoya grew older too. She learned early not to ask for things she knew her father couldn't afford. She smiled more than she complained, helped more than she demanded, and carried her own quiet strength that mirrored her father's. There were nights when Armin would sit alone after she had gone to sleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was doing enough, if he was enough. The world had a way of making even the strongest hearts doubt themselves. And then there was Rayhan. His journey had been no less difficult. After that day at the shop, he worked harder than he ever had before. The repaired bicycle became his lifeline, his first step towards something bigger. He took every job he could, learned every skill he was offered, and refused to let circumstances define his future. He studied under streetlights, borrowed books he couldn't afford, and pushed himself beyond exhaustion. There were moments when giving up would have been easier, but the memory of that one act of kindness, those simple words, kept him going. Pay me when you're the boss. It wasn't just a sentence anymore. It became a promise. 5 years later, the street where Armin lived hadn't changed much. The paint was still chipped, the road still uneven, and the houses still carried the same tired stories. But that morning, something was different. The limousine stood out like a dream that had wandered into reality by mistake. Neighbors peeked through curtains, children gathered at a distance, and whispers filled the air. No one knew why it was there. Inside the house, Armin was getting ready for another day of work. He had taken a job as security guard at a warehouse, a far cry from what he once hoped for, but it paid just enough to keep them going. There was a knock on the door. He opened it slowly, not expecting anything unusual, and then he saw him. Rayhan stood there, no longer the boy with worn-out shoes, but a man transformed by time, effort, and success. His clothes were tailored, his posture confident, but his eyes still carried the same gratitude from years ago. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Time seemed to fold in on itself, bringing the past and present together in a single breath. Rayhan stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion that words could barely contain. He had kept his promise. What followed wasn't just a reunion. It was a turning point. Rayhan had built something remarkable over the years, starting small but growing with persistence and vision. He now owned a successful logistics company, one that had begun with a single bicycle and a refusal to give up, and he hadn't forgotten. He told Armin that the man who had helped him when he had nothing deserved more than just repayment. He deserved opportunity, dignity, and a chance to finally rest from years of struggle. The limousine wasn't just for show. It was there to take Armin and Zoya to a new chapter of their lives. Rayhan had bought them a home, not out of charity, but out of respect. He offered Armin a position in his company, not as a favor, but because he trusted him, believed in him, and wanted him to be part of something bigger. Armin stood there, overwhelmed, his eyes filling with tears he had long learned to hide. Because sometimes life doesn't just test you. Sometimes it remembers you, and when it does, it finds a way to give back. Zoya watched from behind her father, not fully understanding everything, but sensing that something beautiful was happening, something that would change their lives forever. The man who had once given without expecting anything in return was now receiving more than he ever imagined, and it all began with a simple act of kindness. As the limousine drove away from that small street, it didn't just carry people. It carried proof that no good deed is ever truly lost. It waits, it grows, and one day, when you least expect it, it comes back to find you. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't just scroll away. Like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters, and subscribe to Heartfelt Stories for more stories that stay with you long after they end. And before we reach the final moment, here's something special. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where kindness came back to you in an unexpected way? Because stories like this aren't just stories. They are reflections of what the world can be, if we choose to make it better. And somewhere out there, someone is still holding on to hope because of a moment, a gesture, or words they will never forget. Pay me when you're the boss. And maybe, just maybe, they will